He told me to destroy the letters, so I read them first. The words echoed in her mind as rain rattled against the tall windows of the schoolroom. Miss Clara Whitmore stood by the hearth, one hand trembling above the fire. In the other, she held a bundle of envelopes tied with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting was delicate, almost tender, yet each word inside burned hotter than the coals before her. Outside, the storm rolled over the moors, and Ravenwell Hall groaned beneath the wind. It had been Lord Harroway himself who handed her the letters less than an hour ago. His voice was low, hollow. "You will destroy them, Miss Whitmore. Before my wife returns, no one must read them." No one, she had curtsied, as any servant would, and she had promised obedience. But obedience is a fragile thing, easily broken by curiosity and by loneliness. The hall clock struck 11. The children were asleep. The house was silent, save for the crackle of fire and the sigh of the wind through the shutters. Clara loosened the ribbon. The first letter began simply. "My dearest Julian, I heard your name spoken in the square today, and I thought my heart might stop. Tell me you have not forgotten the cliffs, or what you swore upon the ravens." Clara frowned. The ink was faded but unmistakably personal, intimate in a way that made her cheeks warm. "Julian," she whispered softly, "not Lord Harroway." One letter followed another, 20 in all. Some were stained with tears, one was torn clean across. Each was signed the same way. "Yours always, Eleanor. Eleanor Finch." The name stirred something faint in Clara's memory, a whisper from the servants' hall. The woman who drowned, the one they never spoke of after Lady Isabel arrived. She lifted the last letter to the firelight. It was shorter than the rest. "If you do not answer, I shall come to Ravenwell myself. Our child deserves to know his father." Clara froze. "A child?" From the hallway came a faint creak. She blew out the candle. Darkness swallowed the room, save for the orange glow of the hearth. The door opened. "Miss Whitmore?" It was Arthur Blythe, the butler, tall, stooped, carrying a lamp. His tone was calm, but his eyes lingered on the half-burned envelope in the grate. "You work late, miss." "I find the quiet helpful," she said quickly. He nodded once. A wise habit. "Good night, then." When he left, she waited until his steps faded. Then she knelt before the fire. One by one, she fed the letters to the flames, all but one. The final letter, the one that mentioned the child, she hid beneath the floorboard behind the old school desk. She didn't know why, only that her hands refused to let it go. As the paper curled and blackened, she whispered to herself, "Forgive me, Lord Harroway." But secrets burn longer than paper. At dawn, the storm had passed. The sun rose pale and cold over the moors. Clara stood by the window, eyes heavy from sleeplessness. A carriage rattled over the gravel drive. Lady Isabel had returned from London. Within minutes, the house was alive again, doors slamming, servants rushing, breakfast trays clattering. Mrs. Pennington, the housekeeper, appeared at the door. "His lordship requests your presence in the library." Immediately, Clara's throat went dry. Of course. The walk to the library felt endless. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch her pass. Generations of Harroways, pale and stern. Lord Julian stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn as she curtsied. "Did you burn them?" "Yes, my lord." "All of them?" She hesitated, a heartbeat too long. "I was thorough, my lord." He studied her face, then sighed. "Good. If Lady Isabel were to find those letters, it would destroy this house." The word destroy trembled on his lips. From behind her came the rustle of silk. Lady Isabel Harroway entered, veiled and composed. Good morning, Miss Whitmore. I trust you slept well. Yes, my lady. His lordship has been unwell again. I hope you've not been troubling him with idle conversation. Of course not, my lady. Good. See that it stays that way. The exchange lasted seconds, yet Clara's pulse raced as if she'd run miles. Lady Isabel smiled faintly, the kind of smile that meant, I know more than you think. When Clara was dismissed, she stepped into the corridor, heart hammering. In her apron pocket, the hidden letter seemed to throb with heat. She whispered, barely audible even to herself, If anyone asks, I was never here. The next morning, the air at Ravenwell Hall carried that uneasy quiet that follows a storm. It was neither peace nor calm, only the kind of stillness that waits for something to break. Miss Clara Whitmore stood at the long schoolroom window, watching the fog drift through the trees. In the reflection of the glass, she could see the children behind her. Eliza hunched over her Latin, Henry tracing figures in the condensation on the pane. Miss Whitmore? Eliza said suddenly. Why does the family portrait look so sad? Clara turned. The great canvas on the wall behind the desk showed Lord and Lady Harroway with their children. But there were only two figures beside them, a boy and a baby. The brushstrokes were old, the faces stiff. Yet beneath the painted cradle, faint and half concealed by shadow, something was scratched into the varnish. A name. Clara stepped closer. The light from the window caught the faint lettering. Eleanor. Her breath caught in her throat. Who is Eleanor? She asked softly. Eliza frowned. Mamma says she was no one. Clara forced a smile. Then perhaps she was just the artist's muse. But the girl shook her head. No. Mrs. Pennington says the house used to have another nursery, in the east wing. It was locked after something happened. Before Clara could answer, the door opened. Lady Isabel Harroway entered, the air tightening around her like frost. Eliza, Henry, go down to breakfast, she said gently, though her eyes never left Clara. When the children had gone, the gentleness vanished. You were in the library last night. Clara's pulse jumped. My lady? Arthur tells me you burned something. His lordship claimed it was old receipts. She paused. Was it? Clara met her gaze, summoning the courage she didn't feel. Yes, my lady. Isabel studied her a moment longer. Good. Curiosity, she said, is the governess's greatest sin. It always ends the same way, dismissal or ruin. She turned to leave, then stopped by the door. And Miss Whitmore, if you should ever find any letters, journals, or trinkets from the previous mistress of this house, bring them to me. Directly. I will see to their destruction. The word destruction lingered long after she was gone. That evening, Clara returned to the schoolroom alone. The fire burned low, the light fading. She pried up the loose floorboard once more and drew out the surviving letter. The paper was softer now, fragile with age. Her eyes traced the words again and again. Our child deserves to know his father. She whispered the name aloud. Eleanor Finch. The moment she did, a voice spoke from behind her. You found it then. She spun around. Arthur Blythe stood in the doorway, hat in hand. The lamplight caught the deep lines of his face. I knew those letters would turn up sooner or later, he said quietly. Lord Harroway's past has a way of crawling back from the grave. Clara's heart pounded. You knew her? Eleanor Finch? He nodded. Everyone did. She was a companion to Lady Isabel's aunt before the marriage. Pretty thing. Too clever for her own good. What happened to her? Arthur hesitated. She left. That's what we were told. And what do you believe? His eyes met hers, weary, sad. That she left something behind. He glanced toward the east wing, where the corridor vanished into darkness. If you mean to stay in this house, miss, take my advice. Don't go looking for ghosts. Some of them answer. Then he left her there, the echo of his boots fading into the long corridor. Later that night, Clara could not sleep. The wind had risen again, moaning softly through the chimney. She rose, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and took a candle. Her feet carried her almost without will, past the nursery, down the east hallway. The air grew colder with every step. Dust drifted in the lamplight, and the scent of damp and neglect filled her lungs. At the end of the passage stood a locked door. The paint was blistered, the handle stiff with rust. Above it hung a tarnished plaque. Nursery wing. She hesitated. A sound, faint, like the creak of a cradle. Then silence. She should have turned back. She knew it. Instead, she lifted her candle and whispered, "If you're still here, Eleanor, tell me what you want me to see." The flame flickered wildly, then went still. A draught brushed her cheek, a sigh, or perhaps a warning. And then she saw it. A small slip of paper wedged beneath the door. She bent, trembling, and pulled it free. It was a fragment of a letter, written in the same hand as the others. The ink had bled from damp, but 2 lines remained legible. "If this reaches you, Julian, know that the boy lives." Clara pressed it to her chest. "The boy?" From behind her came the sound of footsteps. She turned, but the corridor was empty. Still, a man's voice, faint, low, unmistakable, drifted through the dark. "Miss Whitmore, what have you done?" The candle guttered. The light went out. When the candle died, the darkness seemed to press against her like a living thing. Miss Clara Whitmore stood frozen in the east hallway of Ravenwell Hall, clutching the fragment of the letter. The silence was total. And then, from somewhere beyond the locked nursery door, came the faintest sound of movement. A shuffle, a sigh. Her throat tightened. "Who's there?" No answer. Only the ticking of her heartbeat. She turned and half ran back through the corridor, her candle sputtering to life again as she reached the main staircase. When she stepped into the light of the hall, Lady Isabel Harroway was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, wrapped in a crimson dressing gown. "Miss Whitmore," she said softly, "you've been walking." Clara froze. "I couldn't sleep." "I see." Lady Isabel's voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "And did you find it?" Clara's stomach twisted. "Find what, my lady?" The corners of Isabel's mouth lifted, not in a smile, but in something colder. "Whatever it is you think you're looking for. The east wing is closed for a reason. I meant no harm." "No," Isabel interrupted, her tone smooth as silk. "You meant curiosity. And curiosity has ruined better women than you." For a moment, neither moved. Then Isabel took a step closer, her perfume faint but cloying. "Leave the past buried, Miss Whitmore," she whispered. "It's the only way to survive in this house." She turned and drifted up the stairs, her shadow stretching long across the landing. Clara waited until she was gone, then pressed her back against the wall, her pulse racing. The fragment of the letter still trembled in her hand. The boy lives. But where? The next morning, the air at breakfast was brittle. Lord Julian said little, his eyes unfocused. Lady Isabel poured tea with the serene precision of someone at war with herself. "Miss Whitmore," she said, without looking up, "you will refrain from taking the children into the east garden. It's damp, and I've no wish for coughs." "Yes, my lady." Eliza looked up from her plate. "But, Mama," That's where the gate is, the one that leads to the old stables. Exactly, Lady Isabel said, her tone sweet and final. Old things are best left closed. That afternoon, Clara took the children to their lessons, but her mind was elsewhere. Every creak of the floorboards made her glance over her shoulder. She couldn't stop thinking about the locked nursery, or about Eleanor Finch. The woman who had once written "Our child" deserves to know his father. When the children were napping, she slipped away to the servants' corridor. Rose Harker, the young maid, was folding linen near the pantry. "Rose," Clara whispered, "do you know anything about a child? One that used to live here?" Rose frowned. "A child? Before the master's marriage, you mean?" "Yes." The girl hesitated, glancing toward the door. "They say there was one. A boy. But he was sent away. Or taken. That's what Mrs. Pennington said once when she'd had too much sherry. But she told me never to repeat it." "Why?" "Because Lady Isabel hates the sound of his name." Clara's pulse quickened. "You know it?" Rose bit her lip. "I think it was—" The door opened sharply. Mrs. Pennington stood there, her face pale. "That's enough, Rose." The maid blanched. "Yes, ma'am." The housekeeper's gaze fixed on Clara. "Miss Whitmore, the mistress wishes to see you." In her study. Now the study smelled of lilac and smoke. Lady Isabel stood by the window, her hand resting on the sill. "I have received word," she said, "that you've been speaking with the servants about matters that do not concern you." Clara tried to steady her voice. "I only asked about the house's history, my lady." Isabel turned, her expression unreadable. "The history of this house is written in silence. You'd do well to learn its language." Clara swallowed. "If there is something you wish me to know—" "There isn't." A pause. Then Isabel crossed the room, so close that Clara could smell the faint scent of roses on her gown. "You are young, Miss Whitmore. Pretty, too. Though you try to hide it behind duty. Don't make the mistake of thinking men like my husband value honesty more than discretion." Clara's breath caught. "My lady—" But Isabel leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You see, I know you didn't burn them all." Clara's blood ran cold. I don't understand." "Oh, you do," said Isabel. "And if you value your position, you'll return whatever remains. Quietly. Before my husband remembers how much truth he owes." Then, just as suddenly, her tone softened. "This is not a threat, Miss Whitmore. It's advice, the kind women like us don't often get." She turned away, adjusting a vase of lilies on the desk. "That will be all." That night, Clara packed her few belongings. Her hands shook as she folded her clothes into a small trunk. She couldn't stay. Not after that. Yet when she lifted the floorboard to retrieve the letter, it was gone. In its place was a single black feather, and beneath it, a note written in a neat, unfamiliar hand. "Meet me at the chapel, after midnight. Bring the truth with you." Her pulse thundered. Somewhere beyond the window, thunder rolled again over the moors. The chapel stood at the edge of the moors, half swallowed by fog. Miss Clara Whitmore held her shawl tight as she crossed the wet grass, her boots sinking into the earth with every step. The letter she'd found, "Meet me at the chapel," burned against her palm. Inside, a single candle flickered before the altar. Its light revealed dust, cobwebs, and the faint smell of lilies long dead. A shadow moved. "Miss Whitmore," said a man's voice. She turned. It was Lord Julian Harroway, pale and unsteady, his coat soaked from rain. "My lord, you wrote the note?" He shook his head. "No, but I knew you'd come." Her breath caught. "Then who—" Before he could answer, another figure stepped out from the dark corner near the pews. Arthur Blythe, the butler. He held a lantern low, his expression grave. "It was me, miss. You've both been circling the same secret long enough." Julian's voice hardened. "Arthur, what is this?" "Truth," said the old man, "the kind that eats through stone." He turned to Clara. "The boy Eleanor wrote of, he lived. He was brought here, to this house, 12 years ago. Lady Isabel took him in, as charity. You've met him." Clara's eyes widened. "Henry?" Arthur nodded once. "The master's son, by another woman." Julian's breath came ragged. "Enough." "No, my lord," Arthur said. "You swore you'd tell him when he was of age. But you let your wife bury it instead." Clara felt the world tilt. "Lady Isabel knows?" "She's known since the day she married him," Arthur said quietly. "And she's been keeping that secret with a fist of iron ever since. She fears scandal more than sin." Julian's voice broke. "She threatened to leave. I couldn't let her take the children. And so you let her keep the lie," said Arthur. Clara's gaze fell to the candle's flame, trembling, alive, fragile. "You let him grow up believing he's nothing to you." Julian sank onto the nearest pew, his face pale with shame. "Do you think I haven't tried to tell him? But every time I looked at the boy, I saw her. Eleanor. Her eyes. Her voice. And my wife saw it too." Arthur's voice softened. "And that's why she wanted the letters gone." Julian turned to Clara. "You should have burned them all." She met his gaze. "Perhaps. But then no one would remember her." A door creaked open behind them. Lady Isabel stood in the doorway, rain glittering on her veil like shards of glass. "Well," she said calmly, "at least we're all confessing in the proper place." Clara's heart lurched. "My lady—" Isabel's smile was faint, brittle. "So this is the grand revelation. How poetic. My husband, his servant, and his little governess whispering sins in the dark." Julian rose. "Isabel, please." "Don't," she said sharply. "I knew this day would come. I only hoped it would not come from her." She looked at Clara, eyes bright with fury and something deeper. Sorrow, perhaps. "Do you think you've uncovered evil, Miss Whitmore?" "You've uncovered survival. The only currency women like me are allowed. I never meant to." "Of course you did," said Isabel. "You're young. You still believe truth has wings. But truth falls, Miss Whitmore. It falls like every woman who forgets her place." She turned toward Julian. "And you. You let me live beside that child, raise him, love him, while the walls whispered that he wasn't mine." Julian's voice broke. "You said you forgave me." "I said what I had to," she hissed, "because I loved him. Because the only thing worse than losing your name is losing your child's." A flash of lightning lit the chapel. Clara stepped forward. "Then stop this. Tell him. Tell Henry who he is." Isabel's gaze fixed on her. And what would that do? Bring him joy? Or destroy every chance he has at peace? Silence fell. Then Isabel reached into her cloak and drew something from within. A sealed envelope, the wax still intact. She held it out to Clara. "Here," she said. "The last of Eleanor Finch's letters. I kept it all these years. I thought I'd burned it, but I couldn't." Clara hesitated. "Why give it to me?" "Because I'm tired," Isabel whispered, "and because you're the only one here who might still do the right thing." She turned to Julian, her voice cold again. "You once told me love was a kind of faith. Perhaps this is mine, giving you one last chance to be decent." Then she placed the letter on the altar and walked out into the rain. For a long moment, no one spoke. Julian stared at the envelope, trembling. Eleanor's hand. Arthur set down his lantern. "You should read it, my lord." Julian reached for it, then stopped. No. Clara unfolded the paper. The ink was faded, but clear. "If you ever find this, Julian, tell him I forgave you long before I died. Tell our son that his mother loved him, but it was you who kept him safe. Do not let him grow up in shame. Let him grow up in truth. Eleanor Finch." The words hung in the air like a benediction. Clara folded the letter slowly, her eyes stinging. "This isn't just about your past, my lord. It's about his future." Julian covered his face with his hands. "What would you have me do?" She looked toward the doorway where Isabel had gone. "Tell him before she does." Outside, thunder cracked again, and the candle guttered in the draught. Arthur placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. "You've done what no one else in this house dared, miss. You've lit a fire." She looked down at the letter, her voice trembling. "Then let it burn bright enough to reach him." 3 years had passed since the night in the chapel. The moors still stretched endless and grey, but Ravenwell Hall had changed. The windows no longer glowed late into the night. The great portraits in the drawing-room had been taken down, and of the Harraways, only whispers remained. Miss Clara Whitmore, or rather Mrs. Whitmore as she was now called, lived in the steward's cottage on the edge of the estate. She taught the village children of Eldermere to read and write, and every morning she walked past the gates of the hall, now shuttered and silent. They said Lady Isabel had gone abroad, to some sanatorium in France. They said Lord Julian had fallen ill the following winter and never recovered. But Henry had stayed. He was taller now, 12 and solemn, with the same quiet grace that had once haunted his father. And though no one in the village dared speak it aloud, they all knew the truth. He was the heir, legitimate or not, and the hall would one day belong to him. It was late autumn when he came to see her. The wind carried the scent of burning leaves, and the sky hung low with rain. "Miss Whitmore?" he asked softly, still refusing to call her by her married name. She smiled. "You'll always call me that, won't you?" He hesitated by the gate. "You told me once that truth is the only thing that can't be burned. Was that real? Or something teachers say to make children brave?" Clara's heart caught. It was real. Though sometimes truth burns everything else with it. He looked down at the worn path beneath his boots. "I read the letters." She froze. "All of them?" He nodded. "Arthur kept them after father died. He said I had a right to know. I do, don't I?" "Yes," she whispered. "What kind of man was he?" Clara thought for a moment. A man who meant well, but mistook silence for mercy? Henry's voice trembled. "And my mother?" "She loved you." Enough to be forgotten. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I want to visit her grave." Clara took his hand. "Then we'll go together?" The grave lay beyond the chapel, near the ravine where the wind never stopped moving. The stone was plain, the inscription almost gone. But at its base, a small patch of white heather grew, untouched by frost. Clara knelt to brush away the fallen leaves. "Eleanor Finch," she read softly. "Beloved, though unnamed." Henry laid a hand on the stone. "No one ever brought her flowers?" "She wouldn't have wanted pity," said Clara. "Only remembrance." He looked at her. "Then that's what we'll give her." He drew a folded paper from his coat. It was one of the letters, the final one, written in fading ink. "Let him grow up in truth." He set it at the foot of the grave, weighing it down with a single white pebble. The wind lifted the edges as if the earth itself were trying to read it. "She never saw me," he said quietly. "But I think she knew I'd come." Clara smiled faintly. Some things are known without words. That evening, as they walked back toward the hall, the sky broke open with golden light between the clouds. The moors gleamed like glass, and for the first time, the house didn't look haunted, only old and tired and waiting. Henry stopped at the gate. "Will you come inside?" She hesitated. "I don't belong there anymore." "Yes, you do," he said. "You're the only one who ever told the truth." Her throat tightened. The truth cost too much. "But it gave me everything," he said simply. The boy's words hung in the air, fragile and pure. She followed him through the gate. Inside, the great hall smelled of dust and candle wax, but the hearth had been relit. Above it hung a new portrait, not of lords or ladies, but of the children who had once learned their letters in the old schoolroom. And at the bottom corner, small and barely visible, the artist had written, "In memory of E.F." Later, when the house was quiet again, Clara sat by the fire. The last of the letters lay in her lap, the ink flaking to dust. Arthur entered softly. "He's a good boy," he said. "Better than any man this house has seen." "He'll need to be," she murmured. Arthur nodded toward the hearth. "What will you do with them?" Clara looked at the bundle, Eleanor's words, her truth, her forgiveness. Then she fed the letters into the flames, one by one. "Burn them again?" Arthur asked gently. "No," she said, her voice steady. "Set them free." The paper curled, the smoke rising like a prayer through the chimney. Outside, dawn touched the horizon, pale, trembling, alive. Clara whispered to the quiet room. "She burned the letters once for love. I burn them now for peace." And so the governess, who was told to destroy the letters, did so at last, but only after reading what the world was too proud to remember.